Welcome to The Savage Truth with Cicely Davis. I am your host, Cicely Davis.
Welcome back, Savages, to The Savage Truth. Yours truly here, Cicely. Welcome. You know what? We got something new we're going to do today. We are setting a precedent. I have a guest. For those of you who are returning, as always, thank you for your loyalty, for the ride and dies. For those of you who have been with me since the beginning, as always, I thank you so much for your loyalty and taking the time to tune in. As always, my ask is the same, and that is what? Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And let's get into it. You know, I always talk about on this show about the savage truth. This show is about telling the truth, and we're being absolutely savage about that. You know what? We need savage leadership, which we clearly haven't had, as I say, since Obama in 2008. But clearly that is even more true in the last 3.5 years, as with the Biden administration. With corruption of the Biden administration, we have crime, we've had cover-up, we've had scandal, we have attack on political opponents, we've got socialism, we have a communist agenda, we have attack on law enforcement, we have borders that are not enforced, we have widespread poverty, we've had increase in inflation, we can't afford gas or groceries. The American people are fed up, they are tired, and they are stressed. You know what? What we need right now to get back to our societal norm as Americans, as this exceptional country as we know it to be, we need savage leadership. We need someone with integrity and character. We need America back as we know it. Return to, I'd like to say, the America of the 80s. Remember when the 80s were great and we had Rocky IV and we had the Predator movies and we had all these great American traditions? We want that back. We need savage leadership. You know what? I can go on and on and on, but you know what? Guess what? I can show you better than I can tell you. Watch this.
And I refuse to participate. I'm not adopting your language. I'm not respecting your preferences because you don't own reality. You don't own grammar. You don't own definitions. You don't get to tell me. You're not important enough to provide me with an instruction manual on how to talk to you. Are you kidding? How important do you have to think you are to list at the bottom of your emails? And yeah, I see you laughing about it. It's hilarious, isn't it? But what are the consequences for not abiding by it? What are the consequences? What would happen in this chamber if I were to address Representative Finke? Need I continue? What would the consequences be?
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Exactly. Thank you.
Wow. Savage moment here in Minnesota on the Capitol floor. This is my guest, our very first guest on The Savage Truth, Walter Hudson, everyone. He is a state rep here in Minnesota, representing Northeastern Wright County. Welcome, Walter, and thanks for being here with us.
Thanks for inviting me, Cicely. This is a fantastic opportunity, and I'm excited to talk to folks about the savage truth.
I'm so excited to have him on. You are obviously familiar with the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Shout out to the David Horowitz Freedom Center. So excited to have you. I just thought that, you know what, I had this whole opportunity to invite a whole lot of guests. And I thought about, you know what, I want to invite someone who's actually from my state, but who actually had a savage moment here. And I thought this was a great way to break this precedent and start in. I want you to just introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, again, who you represent, and what actually got you into representing the people of Minnesota and getting into politics altogether.
Yeah, so again, I'm State Representative Walter Hudson, first-term representative running for re-election. Previous to that, I was on the Albertville City Council, a city in which I lived for 7 years. And prior to that, and kind of intermingled with all of it, I've also been an activist in the conservative Republican space, as well as a commentator. So I actually got my start with the David Horowitz Freedom Center. They used to have a publication called Newsreel Blog, which you won't even be able to find on the internet anymore. But I might still have a couple of pieces on Front Page Mag that you could probably Google from back in those days. And that's where I got my start. And then I moved over to PJ Media. I ended up having my own radio show here in the Twin Cities on Twin Cities News Talk for about 3 years. Wow. And I'm currently a VIP contributor to Hot Air. So I still dabble in the commentary space, but obviously the focus has shifted from activist through commentator to now being a public servant.
And we have Donald Trump actually visiting this coming Saturday, and you will be helping with that campaign. So you figure out a way to not only remain active, but really get in where you're needed and to help out. So I have been clearly focused, as so many others here in Minnesota, especially with the Republican Conservative Party, on helping Donald Trump get across the finish line so we can get back to those societal norms. So we're just kind of a very, very conversational bout here. Just want to get people to know who you are and kind of understand what's going on in Minnesota and get your take on what's going on nationally in our country. So welcome, Walter. This is so exciting. Little throwback to the Freedom Center. Love that. Great way to start. So, so much is going on. As a matter of fact, on my drive here, we have the director of the FBI, Ray, is actually speaking to on City Hall right now, talking about the recent assassination attempt. We're going to go to that a little bit down the line, but I'm really interested in getting your take right now on recent events as of yesterday with Kim Cheatle, former director of the United States Social Service, Secret Service. And, she clearly resigned. There was a whole lot of talk and push for her to actually do so immediately after the attempted assassination attempt. What is your take on her resignation and her clear failure with regard to protecting the former president?
Well, her resignation is, of course, appropriate, but it should have came on Sunday morning, within 24 hours, within 12 hours of the incident. It should have been immediate. And regardless of her culpability, right? Like, it happened on your watch. As a matter of honor, you should be stepping aside for the failure to protect a presidential candidate, a former president, no less. Right. But beyond that, I feel as though her resignation, even if it had come on Sunday morning, is inadequate. There is obviously widespread fault, widespread failure by multiple individuals necessary for something like this to happen. And so we need to know who those individuals are. We need to know where exactly the failures occurred, how they occurred, why they occurred, who was responsible, and we need accountability up and down the chain of command.
Yeah.
What I fear is that after this one person falling on their sword, that everything is going to diminish in terms of focus and attention on the particulars and the details, and we're not going to get that widespread accountability that obviously we ought to have.
Yeah, I thought it was really tragic because after she resigned, she was supposed to actually show up and appear with her actual boss, Mayorkas. They chose not to come out. She sent a resignation by way of a letter. And the American people have a lot of questions. And so today, as I was driving in today to meet with you and have this interview, Ray had already said in the beginning statement that his address will be about the shooter. So still, yet today in this moment, American people are not going to really get the questions answered that they really have on the top of mind. Yesterday, I actually made that statement that you said that she should have, if she had any honor at all, she would have resigned immediately. I also thought it would have been really effective for Joe Biden to actually terminate her in that moment. I think it would have sent a real cultural message. I think it's very well known that Joe Biden can get frustrated with his staff. He can become angry and agitated, but he is not a president who likes to fire. And even though there's widespread ineptability on behalf of everyone, I think a whole lot of people in the Biden administration. So, I addressed something, and this might be a little sensitive, but I'm going to go towards male-female here with regard to the Secret Service, because I made a statement yesterday that may or may not be controversial, but I said something that I ended the show by saying, never, ever send a woman to do a man's job. And so I would love to get your take on having women as directors for the Secret Service and women in service for the Secret Service altogether. I'd love to have your take on that.
Sure. Well, I think we're talking about two different categories, right? So Cheatle's role as chief or head of the United States Secret Service, she's not ever going to be in a position where she has to jump and try to take a bullet for the president, right? Like that is an administrative role. And so I do think it's plausible and could even be appropriate to have a woman in that role if she meets the qualifications, if she has the ability to do the administrative tasks and provide the managerial leadership and the top level vision necessary in order for the Secret Service to function. What we don't want to see and we shouldn't see, and this gets into the other category of the physical agents on the ground doing the work, is if hiring a woman for a job is obviously fine, but hiring her because she's a woman, especially in this type of a role where you're dealing with physical security, life and death, is nothing short of a dereliction of duty, right? And I was thinking about this on the way in about like what kind of an analogy could I provide? You know, because if I'm speaking to a female audience, what kind of an analogy could I provide that I think that audience would relate to? And what came to mind was babysitting, right? Like generally speaking, you're not going to hire a 60-year-old man to babysit your kid. Now, that's not because 60-year-old men are incapable of babysitting. And under certain mitigating circumstances, the 60-year-old man happens to be your father, so it's the kid's grandkid or a great uncle or something, then yeah, you might go with that option. But generally speaking, when you look at the bell curve of babysitters, overwhelmingly you're dealing with young women who fulfill that role. And there are reasons for that, because the skill set and frankly trustworthiness overlaps with the need. And so this idea that whatever the role is, that we need to artificially and arbitrarily insert different demographics into it in order to make it diverse. Diversity onto itself is not a value. It just isn't. And no one has ever been able to articulate how it is. Why does something need to be diverse for the sake of diversity? What is the value add of having diversity in a given situation? Now, no doubt there are circumstances where there is a reasonable, you can articulate the value add of having diversity of perspective, diversity of experience, diversity of life, right? Like the type of life people have lived. There are circumstances where you can actually articulate that value that's added, but the value is not the diversity itself. It's not because, oh, look, dark skin walked into the room or a particular gender walked into the room. Like that's not where that value is added. It's what they're bringing with them that has less to do with their innate characteristic and more to do with who they are as a person.
Fantastic. And this is what we hit on yesterday in the show. I'm so glad to have a male speak to this and not be afraid to speak to this, because I think that what we're talking about, and I had some, my DMs were just full of people coming at me before the show, and that's what made me want to actually address the issue in that DEI was needed to happen. You know, it needed to be a woman, and women can do the job, and women are just as capable as men. And I said, I said, okay, so we talked about averages, and I said, okay, are there women that are, bigger in stature, And I said, you know what? Okay, we can admit we see tennis players nowadays. We see women in the WNBA. We're talking about those are exceptions, right? It's not that women can't do the job. And like I said, not that I'm saying at all that any of the women who are now employed with the Secret Service should all go and quit. But I think that what we're talking about, like you said, in comparison is that babysitter. And so when you have the stature of a Donald Trump who is 6'3", a round 5'4" woman really having to lay down her life and protect him, I think any man would feel more comfortable, more protected, and more safe with someone of similar, or even greater stature. And so thank you for being willing to address that, having that from a male perspective. I'm sticking with it, and I'm going to be savage in that moment about that issue, but it's really important to address it. And I think that because of this administration, what we've seen in the past 3.5 years, they have made DEI try to make it a virtue of value. And so, like you said, it's not about color coming into the room. It's about capability and qualification.
I would say what they've made it into is a religious sacrament. DEI has become a religious sacrament. It is way beyond just because, like I say, nobody has ever bothered to articulate what the virtue is.
Sure.
What is the virtue?
Right.
What is the value? What it is it's a sacrament. It's a ritual. It's something that you engage in order to demonstrate your fealty to whatever it is that we are pledging ourselves to as a society and as individuals. Yeah, in diversity we trust has kind of become the national motto.
Right.
And that's complete and utter nonsense.
Sure.
That there's no there. There's no substance there.
Yeah.
You and I both grew up in a time where diversity existed and was a non-issue. We all just got along for this very brief moment around the 80s, right? You brought up the 80s earlier. At that time, when you were black and you got a job, or you were a woman and you got a job, you could confidently rest in the accomplishment of it being on merit, that you earned that job. You earned that position. Nowadays, you can't really say that. Nowadays, there's always that asterisk of, well, why did you really get the job? Is it because you're the most qualified?
And that question lingers, right? That's what's happening. My sister said that she has a friend, and we're going to move on to it. We're going to slide right into this. Is a great segue into the next subject. My sister has a really close friend who works for Delta, and one of the pilots, he has been a pilot for 22 years, black man. And a woman gets on as a passenger, and she says, "Oh, is that what we're doing? That's what we're doing today." And so, he understood because of the context of what's going on. And part of this administration, he he smiled at her and he said, "Welcome aboard," and he let her go. But it's causing people to question because of this entire haze of DEI. So great segue, because now we're hearing that we're going to have the first African-American president in Kamala Harris, as predicted by the Democrat Party. And so wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about a little bit of Kamala as qualified as VP versus and moving into presidency. But let's start with Joe Biden's dropout. He clearly announced that he is remaining on as president, continuing out his term, yet he is not going to accept the nomination to go forward as the run. So just interested in hearing first about the application of the 25th Amendment. And do you think that applies? And should they? And let's talk about the pros and cons of that.
Well, I mean, I think it's listen, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
In the alternate universe, where we're actually concerned about the good of the nation, where we're actually concerned about best practice for the people that live in the United States of America, of course the 25th Amendment should be utilized to remove Joe Biden from office. Actually, what should happen is he should be honorable enough as a human being to step aside. But this is one of the most dishonorable human beings who has ever held power in the United States of America.
Well said.
You have somebody here who spent his entire career self-serving, out in the open, not even thinly veiled, and been applauded and uplifted for it.
Savage truth in that moment right there. Yeah.
All right. And so what I find deeply offensive about this whole situation is that he resigns and he says in his letter that it's for the good of the nation, but he doesn't articulate why. Why is it for the good of the nation for you to step out of the race for president? And is it possible that your reasoning for why it is bad for the nation for you to run for president also applies to the question of whether or not you should continue being the president?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
the entire Democrat Party, by the way, they are all painted with the same dishonorable brush, every single one of them. The entire Democratic Party simply sidesteps that very obvious, rational concern that is not petty. This is the most serious matter that you could possibly conceive of. You're talking about the person who has access to the nuclear codes.
Yes.
You're talking about the person who needs to be able to get up at 3 a.m.
Yes.
to respond to an international incident. We're not going to address that for politics because it makes you look bad, because it might not be politically convenient for you. And I'll tell you what, it's the savage. It's the savage truth, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to hold back.
Don't hold back.
Right.
That's what we do here. Yeah.
There's a lot of conversation about hatred in the political discourse. I got to tell you, there is a responsibility. I'll put it this way. The Democratic Party has a responsibility to quell hatred by stopping their provision of cause to feel that way.
Wow.
When you make choices that put my children at risk for your political convenience, that is a rational cause to hate you. When you make choices that are obviously politically and personally motivated and that are a danger to my community, that provides me with a rational cause to hate you. Going back to what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, a little over a week ago, in the immediate aftermath from that, what did we hear from Democrats? Oh, we need to tone down the rhetoric, right? We need to bring it down. We need to cool down the temperature. Well, you know what would have cooled down the temperature immediately? Accountability. The resignation of Cheatle the next day.
Yeah.
And immediate findings of facts distributed amongst the American people so that there's a sense of order. There's a sense of justice. There's a sense of continuity. They provided none of that. And when you are intentionally evasive and unaccountable, that provides people with a rational reason to hate you. And so they are responsible for elevating the temperature. They are responsible for the hatred in the political discourse because they keep providing people with a rational cause to hate them.
Absolutely. And so this is so good. We're going to stay here for a moment because clearly, there's opinions across the spectrum on this issue alone with his stepping down. But, I think about culpability and I think about responsibility as well. And I think about the left-wing media and the role that they have played, because when I think about the George Clooney op-ed that came out where he was basically saying, I saw him at the last outing and the fundraiser, and he was clearly not a man that is about his wits and he's not capable. And it's like, number one, I don't think George Clooney actually wrote that. I think there was some undermix. But anyhow, he was clearly used as that mouthpiece. The left-wing media and left-wing elites have known for years that this man has been cognitively declined and incapable of running this country. We've been asking and asking and asking, who is actually making decisions? Who's actually running the country? Who is at the helm of the decision-making here in our country? Who is responsible for all of the discourse, all of the crime and the scandals? And we can't get an answer. And now that because they are embarrassed, Joe Biden has essentially embarrassed them. They have a new candidate to which they want to focus. So they're willing to now throw him under the bus and admit some things. I think that we have a whole stage full of people who are responsible, who have played into the Joe Biden that we have known for quite some time and have watched. This isn't just about cognitive decline. This is about a man who has participated in decades. How long has Joe Biden been in office? 50-something years? I mean,
longer than I've been alive.
Right. Longer than I've been alive.
Right.
Longer than a lot of people have been alive. And he has been allowed to corrupt. His family has been, the Biden crime family really, truly exists. And so I think that when we look forward to, is he supposed to speak today about why he's stepping down?
I believe so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll pay attention to that and hear what his comments are going to be. With regard to the 25th Amendment, I agree with you, and I addressed this as well on the show yesterday, that in that perfect world, that's what would be applied. I have no confidence whatsoever that this administration will apply that, or that they will follow the rules or adhere anything according to the Constitution, because they've never done it. So Kamala Harris, as a prospective first woman of color, female president, her record is clear. I think that's what the Trump-Vance ticket will focus on, is really getting everyone to understand her record. But how do you think they have used back again to that DEI with regard to Kamala Harris? And let's discuss her performance a little bit as VP, and then going forward as a, obviously prospective presidential nominee.
Well, it's not even speculation to say that Kamala Harris is a DEI hire. Joe Biden explicitly stated that one of his qualifications that he was looking for in a vice presidential candidate was a black woman. Okay, well, I guess we know why you were picked then, right? I mean, you're going to take innate characteristics that don't add any value whatsoever to the role that you're seeking onto themselves. And you're going to make that the chief criteria, your top criteria as to how you select the person who's a heartbeat away from the presidency. So we already know that she's a diversity hire.
Right.
They've admitted that.
Right.
And that's kind of how her career has gone from the start.
Yeah.
I know it's a Freedom Center project, but if you go over to the Daily Wire and you watch their series Scamala, where they break down the entire history of Kamala Harris from her creative start in politics, all the way up to not just becoming vice president, but how she's conducted herself in office.
Sure.
You're going to find that this is someone who has not advanced because she demonstrated a profound ability to administrate, or because she was deeply honorable or honest, or was pursuing the public good. It's someone who at every turn has been utilizing this increasingly bizarre woke notion of turning our value system upside down to catapult herself up to the next level.
Sure. And have we not seen, and let's talk about that a little bit, have we not seen that throughout this administration? Buttigieg being chosen because of, his sexual orientation. We've seen that with Kamala. We've seen that with justices. We've seen ineptability across the board with this administration, ignoring and bypassing merit and choosing on melanin and characteristics. And I think that if we ever wanted to slow down and take a lens as to what the application of DEI would be, and the outcomes, we just have to refer to the Biden administration and poor performance. And I think that if people were able to slow down and really take a step back objectively and just say, you know what, we talk about contrasts and comparisons on this show. And if you were to just contrast and compare the Trump administration versus the Biden administration, where you have people who were chosen because of characteristics and ability and tenure versus skin color and culture and orientation, the outcomes are very, very, very different. And so going forward, I think that, and let me know how you think about I don't even want to speak this out because I believe in not, but Kamala is president of the United States.
Yeah.
And her administration, what the next 4 years would be. I mean, I just shudder to think.
Oh, well, listen, Kamala Harris, I think it's very fair to say, is the most radical presidential candidate that we have ever had in the history of the union.
Savage truth.
There is nothing.
Yeah.
Think of the craziest left-wing nonsense you have ever been confronted with. She agrees with it.
Absolutely.
And would absolutely sign that bill.
Yeah.
There is no, basically, if we elect her, and I tweeted this out the other day, if we elect Kamala Harris, we might as well disband the nation and submit ourselves to the predations of the World Economic Forum.
Sure.
Because that is, in effect, what will happen. You will not have a functional nation under a Kamala Harris administration, and she will yield eagerly to every women desire of these globalists in the WEF who think that we should be eating bugs And there was an article I saw today. They're going to war with rice now over methane gas. I mean, this green thing,
Sure.
what they're doing to energy, which, by the way, is life. Energy is life, okay? So the attack that they're making on energy over greenhouse gases and climate change is an attack on life. It is going to impact, and already is impacting, the poorest of the poor first and most intensely. It does cost lives. We are on the verge of a population collapse globally. Some nations are worse than others. China's in pretty bad shape. What we need is a Trump-Vance administration that, quite frankly, flips the bird at all that nonsense, restores the national identity of the United States of America, and puts us on the path towards prosperity and abundance. If we elect Kamala Harris, it's like flushing the toilet on the remains of the country.
Wow. Flushing I love that. You know what? Since you're going to be, again, with the Trump administration this coming Saturday with that visit, with the Trump-Vance visit. And I want to talk a little bit about contrast and talk a little bit about what it was like under President Trump and what J.D. Vance brings to the ticket, his crossover appeal, the unification of, it seems like there's this excitement going on right now with the Republican Party, but also with Americans. There seems to be this snapback where Americans said, okay, we've had Joe Biden. We have to accept that he's in. He was supposed to be the adult in the room. He was supposed to be that moderate. That clearly all turned out to be flat out lies. And Americans, the reason why I threw the background up today is because this past July, 4th of July, Walter, was probably the most patriotic that I had seen in the last 3.5 years. And I think it's just a signal of Americans saying, okay, we're done. We've had it. We miss the America of old. We want to wave our flags. We're going to be out. We want to eat our ice cream and celebrate and do cookouts and things like that. But, what is that hope that Americans have in reflection to the last 3.5 years? And what do you think that Trump-Vance ticket will do to impact that and bringing hope back to Americans?
Well, let me start off by clarifying, just so I don't get in trouble, that my relationship to the Trump campaign is as a volunteer this Saturday, this upcoming Saturday at the rally. I don't have any official connection with the campaign. But to answer your question, boy, I mean, I was at the Republican National Convention as a guest all week long last week in Milwaukee, and it was one of the most affirming and bolstering and encouraging experiences of my life.
Wow.
I have to confess, I had never really paid a whole lot of attention to J.D. Vance. He just wasn't on my radar. I knew the name. A couple of weeks ago, I would have had to look him up to know what he looks like.
Okay.
But I'll tell you, hearing his story from him and from his wife on the convention floor, my heart was just uplifted, because this is a guy, he and his wife and his family are the American dream.
They are it.
They are literally the American dream.
Right.
You know whose else dream they are? MLK's.
Yes. Let's speak to that. What
you're dealing with here is a kid who came up from absolutely nothing, who grew up in total poverty with every disadvantage, who didn't get his fair share of that white privilege that we are hearing so much about.
I thought that was inherent.
Right. Well,
isn't that just?
Yeah, it's supposed to just be this bottomless well.
Right.
There's plenty of people.
Can't shake it.
Right. Yeah. There's plenty of people living in trailer parks who may object to the power of their white privilege.
Right.
But he made choices. And those choices were to serve.
I'm sorry, he made what? He did what?
Yeah.
He made choices.
And the nature of his choices were to serve and to be of value and to gain value for himself and his family and his community. He joined the Marines.
Yeah.
Right. He went to Yale. where he met his wife, who came from a totally different background, racially, socioeconomically,
Yes.
geographically,
Yes. Yeah.
totally different background.
Yeah.
He came to her with an offer of, the way he described it, or it might have been her describing it, that he had $120,000 worth of student loan debt and a grave plot in Kentucky.
And that's right. Yeah. That was him explaining that. Yeah.
And
That's my offer.
Right.
That's what I'm bringing to the table.
And she says yes. Now, why does she say yes? Because she recognizes the unlimited potential of somebody who's willing to do the work that he's done.
Yeah.
She recognizes how smart he is.
Yeah.
She recognizes his go-get-em attitude. And above all else, she trusts his pledge of commitment to her.
Yeah.
And believes his desire to form a family and for that to be the top accomplishment of his life.
And I believe that character probably exuded him. He clearly came from good stock. I mean, he talked about his grandmother and the influence. He talked about the struggles of his mother and that household. But I can tell you from someone who did not attend, but sitting in my living room, that spirit and that determination came through the television screen. I felt like I was there because there was this unification and this high spirit at the RNC, but particularly his story. And he was just so very genuine. He was so very transparent. His wife was so very humble and approachable and kind, and just, they were this explosion of the American dream coming together and telling this amazing story. And it was all wrapped up in, at the height of it all, he gives this amazing speech and she introduces him, and then the next day for Trump to follow. I can tell you that I felt like I was there. I wish I had been there personally like you, but I can tell you that from those of us who did not have the opportunity to be there and had that privilege, we still felt like we were right there. It was just so very apparent. That is the reason for this. That's what was felt in July 4th. I am telling you, I'm seeing more American flags come out. I'm seeing people are not afraid to wear their affiliated political hats and T-shirts and sayings, but there's just a return somehow of this societal norm that is all America. And it just feels so good. And I can't help but think that the RNC last week really helped. But more so that in concert to where the Democratic Party has taken us from the last 3.5 years. And Americans, the whole of America, the American majority recognizing that this is not what we want, like you said, for me, myself, my family, and future generations, my children and my children's children going forward. Do you feel that coming away from the RNC, that the party itself, the Republican Conservative Party, is more unified?
Oh, never.
Raise that important.
Never more so now than it has ever been. I mean, this is the most unified I've ever seen the party, and for it to be unified nationally. And by the way, that unification is also evident here in the state of Minnesota in terms of, like every state, we have our different factions that have different priorities and different ideological bents. But the sense of common cause amongst Republicans right now is more cohesive than I have ever seen it. And I'll tell you what else. It's joyful. It's uplifting. It's buoyant. There's Andrew Breitbart used to talk about being a happy warrior, or used to be described as a happy warrior. That happy warrior spirit is prolific throughout the Republican ecosphere right now. And what I find deeply instructive is that we thrive in that environment. Conservatives, Republicans thrive in an environment of joy and hopefulness and honor and celebration. Right? We thrive in that space. Democrats wither. The left writhes. And what are they doing right now in order to retake the lead in the presidential race? They're trying to sow division.
Right.
They're trying to stoke anger. They're trying to pit this part of America against that part of America. Because in order for them to succeed, they are birthed out of and thrive on unrest. 2020, Minneapolis burning. That is the backdrop
Absolutely.
for the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
Right? That's where they thrive. That's where they find themselves the most successful and the most powerful. And so, folks, on the national stage, we are quite literally presented with, I guess it is metaphorical and not literal. We are metaphorically presented with two roads, right? And one leads to this bright, happy, sunshine prairie where there's optimism and hope. And the other leads off into this hellish, dark, like self-flagellating, I need to demonstrate my fealty to the diversity kings. And it's just the clearest choice you could possibly make.
Yeah.
And that really, the only thing that brings me down at this point, the only thing, is that we're not 80-20, 90-10 across the board.
Agreed.
Like it should be the most obvious choice in the world.
Yeah.
And yet we still have to fight for it.
Yeah, we still have to fight for it. I think that we've talked a lot on this show about the corruption and the distrust of the American people with all of our abbreviated agencies, CI, DOJ, and so forth. And so that clarity that you're speaking of is so refreshing to me, because what I really truly want for Americans is when it's time to vote, for that choice to be so very clear and obvious, where, again, the American majority, the majority of Americans, it looks like 1984, right? Where we have 49 out of 50 states voting red. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, of course, because that's your party. No, what I'm saying is that in spite of our political differences, when it came to the fundamentals, Americans thought the same way with regard to education, law and order, faith, character, trust in government, the role of government, the role of family, what our future looks like, the future of America, what we all want collectively as a society, who we are and our position in the globe, and the importance of a democracy and being a working, successful republic. That felt so good. That's what I'm wanting to return. And I feel like with this agenda and what has been pushed upon us from this administration from the last 3.5 years, it's allowed Americans to truly see that if we continue down this road, we can go even further left than we have this last 3.5 with Kamala, and the American people coming together holistically and saying, you know what, not interested. Do you believe that this is going to be fight tooth and nail with the Kamala versus Donald Trump?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, first of all, let me backtrack just a little bit to your point regarding the unification that we saw in 1984 under Reagan. And the reason why was that he appealed to these universal values that are quintessentially American values. Here's why we know that's still true. Because the governor of this state, Tim Walz, has been preening himself all around the nation to any camera or mic that will yield him the time to try to tear down who? J.D. Vance.
Yes.
The guy who we just talked about. Now, why is he doing that? Now, the obvious reason is he wants to be the vice presidential pick under the Harris ticket. But more globally, strategically, how Tim Walz is presenting himself is as the folksy small town guy.
Right.
I'm from a small town. J.D. Vance doesn't know anything about small towns. In small towns, we mind our own business, right? So he's managed to craft this extraordinarily fraudulent small town persona. And he's making an appeal to an aspect of small town living, which indeed is mind your own business. Keep your eye on your own bobber, as we say in Minnesota. But he doesn't believe that. This is the guy who shut down the entire state, locked people in their homes, shut down their businesses, shut down churches while leaving liquor stores and his friend's favorite largest candy store open, right? Like this is the guy who tells you local school boards that they can't decide what their own curriculum is going to be. This is the guy who's mandating to every employer in the state, regardless of their size, down to the small business that has only one employee, your school district, your city council, that they all have to provide the exact same paid time leave policy with the exact same administrative burdens and what have you, regardless of the...
It's jump-started the mayhem of 2020.
Absolutely.
You were the start of that. You were solely responsible for the chaos and mayhem across the entire country. Started here in Minnesota under this leadership with Tim Walz. Yeah.
Not a small town value, right? But okay, so here's my thing though. My point is that they have to fake it. Mm-hmm. They have to lie about who they are and lie about who we are. They have to appropriate. You want to talk about cultural appropriation? Mm-hmm. The Democrats have to appropriate Republican culture in order to win.
Wow. That's a savage truth right there. Wow.
It's true.
Wow.
Democrats have to appropriate Republican culture in order to win. And so the question, again, going back to my metaphorical roads diverging, is do you want the fakers? Do you want the posers? Do you want the liars? Mm-hmm. Or do you want the real thing? Do you want to mainline the actual small town values? Right. The people who actually believe in your individual capacity to pursue your dreams and to accumulate value for your family and to prosper and to make the nation a better place? Or do you want people who will tell you all those things and then give you none of it?
Right.
Take it all from you.
You know, my question was about the competition between Kamala and Donald Trump, but we're going to get back to that. But actually, you know what? Let's stay on J.D. Vance for a little bit, because I actually read something yesterday that said J.D. Vance is actually appealing to not only our generation, Generation X, but boomers, but also, and obviously millennials, because that's a group to which he's appealing to Gen Zers and Gen Y. Mm. So his appeal across the board is obviously a threat, which is why we're seeing, these governors like Tim Walz going across the country and faking it. How deep do you believe is J.D. Vance's and his influence on taking that win in November? You think it's that significant?
I think
key states and swing states, by the way, is what I'm referring to. Yeah.
I think that at the end of the day, it is going to come down to Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris.
Okay. Yep.
That's always the case. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance around vice presidential picks, and they do provide material support, and it's better to have a good one than to have a bad one. There's no doubt about that. But at the end of the day, this is a race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris.
Okay.
Now, J.D. Vance provides tremendous support to that mission. He's from what I've seen thus far, a tremendous addition to the ticket and brings tremendous value. Will he be the definitive reason why Trump wins or loses? The buck stops with Trump.
Sure. Do you want to see a debate between Kamala and Donald Trump?
I do.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it will happen?
I do.
Yeah. I think it has to happen. Obviously, that goes without saying. I want to see that, and I think it needs to happen, and I think it will. I think, she's feeling very full of herself right now. I just saw her at a speech. She's clearly dodging and snubbing Netanyahu as he shows up here to speak today. And so are a vast number of other Democrats. That's another subject. I'll handle that on Monday. But I know, I agree with you that this will come down to Donald versus Kamala, and the people will have to make a decision. And like you said, that clarity is there, and you have to make a decision on which way you want to go, and what you really truly want your future to be and look like here in America and as American, and your future and your children's future. So I just want to wrap up by talking a little bit about, if you could share what's going on here in Minnesota, and then talk about local government and why it's so important. And we'll actually end there and kind of, this is our first guest, you guys. This is really exciting. But talk a little bit about what's going on, what you see, what's going on locally, why local government is so important, what's going on in Minnesota, and, the future.
Well, these past 2 years, we've been suffering under a Democrat trifecta here in the state of Minnesota. And it's not the first time in recent years that the Democrats have had a trifecta, but the last time they had one, they were much more restrained than they are now, than they have been these past 2 years. And the Speaker of the House Melissa Hortman was the speaker under both of those periods of time. And I think that she came out of her first bite at the apple under a trifecta with a certain amount of regret for not doing as much as she possibly could.
Sure.
And so she came into this trifecta under Tim Walz, who was very different than the previous governor, Mark Dayton, much more of a radical, much more aligned with the Kamala Harris than previous kind of blue dog Democrats. They entered this legislative term with a commitment to do anything and everything that they wanted.
Sure.
And by God, they did. We now have in Minnesota the most radical abortion provision not just in the country, in the world. We are...
I don't know that about this state. Yeah. Say that again. That's really important for people to know.
We have the most extreme abortion provision in the world here in Minnesota. On-demand termination of pregnancy at any point during the pregnancy for any reason, no question asked, with unregulated, uninspected, unaccountable clinics and abortion providers. It is the wild, wild west. It is quite literally anarchy in that one specific sector.
Yeah.
Abortion. To the point where an 11-year-old girl can walk into an abortion clinic, get sterilized with no parental consent, no parental notification, and no liability from the people who do that to her. And by the way, not just a Minnesotan 11-year-old, it could be one that was trafficked from another state or another country. Minnesota is known in law enforcement circles as one of the worst destinations for human trafficking in the nation.
Yeah.
Because of these loosey-goosey laws that we have. If you have some commercial liabilities you want to take care of as a human trafficker, bring them to Minnesota. We'll get them sterilized. We'll take care of that pregnancy. We'll get your product back out on the street.
Wow.
That's where we're at.
You know, Walter, I want to talk to you about that really quickly. Why Minnesota? I mean, I have said countless times, Rick is a witness, viewers are witness. It seems as though we have this state in literally the middle of America, who I have said is in competition to be the most radical state operatively, in competition with New York and California. It's mind-boggling to me, the things that comes out of this Midwest state, a beautiful state. We have clean waters, we have wildlife, we have a fantastic economy. You know, it's just really interesting. It's just really important to stress to you that I appreciate having a warrior like you. And it's just so easy to just give up, cut tail, and run, right? And because of, we have Keith Ellison out of Minnesota. We have Ilhan Omar out of Minnesota. We've got Tim Walz, right? We've got Coy. We have, who was I going to say? We have Klobuchar out of Minnesota. I mean, this state is doing some incredibly radical things. So it's so important to you. I think that's why clearly Walz is, running around to make sure that Minnesota remains this Democratic stronghold. But why do you, go ahead, say what you're going to say.
Well, I'm just going to say they are panicked.
Yeah, absolutely.
They are absolutely panicked about the direction that Minnesota is tilting, and they damn well ought to be, because we're coming for them.
Okay? People are coming.
People have had enough.
Yeah.
They are sick of it.
Yeah.
I'm at the point where I'm hearing from in-laws and people who I've worked for or with who I know are lefties. I know they're liberals who are, to my great surprise, asking me what they could do to help.
My children are lefties.
Right.
They said, we're voting for Trump.
And it's
blew our mind, my husband and I. Yeah.
once you get past the appropriated sentimentality what the culture that the Democrats have to appropriate from the Republicans and wear like a sheepskin over their wolf nature.
Right.
Once you get past that and you see, which we are seeing right now, in terms of the economic impact, moral degeneracy, young people looking at their future and seeing nothing to live for, nothing to hope for, nothing to get up out of bed for. Right. When you actually get a taste of what it is that they're offering, that they're doing, not what they're saying, but what they've done,
they're offering.
It's time for a change, and everybody knows it. And so there's a sense of desperation amongst the Democrats right now to cling to, especially with all this talk of Trump potentially flipping the state. Because consider this. How embarrassing for Tim Walz to have Minnesota go to Trump and that be the first time Minnesota has voted for a Republican presidential nominee since 1972. And it happens under Walz's
on his watch. Right. That's
a hell of a black eye.
Just as embarrassed as AOC was when Trump turned out Brooklyn, right? It was just like, we'll love to see him when he gets there. It's like, okay, well, those aren't true Brooklyn people, you know? Yeah, you're right. That's something to consider.
Yeah, so they're very desperate to make sure that doesn't happen and that they don't get embarrassed by that. The problem is that we've all woken up. I mean, they may be woke, but we're awake. Right? Okay.
I love that.
They may be woke, but we're sober.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so we're clear-eyed and we're committed. And what I see amongst the grassroots, and it's a top to bottom thing on the Republican side and the conservative ecosphere, is a commitment to getting ballots in boxes. We are done. I mean, listen, are we going to continue to look at efforts for election integrity? Of course we are. Are we going to continue to try to clean the voter rolls? Absolutely. Do we need election judges and poll watchers and all these things? You bet. Are we glad that we have things like Votify and other groups that are available to take reports of odd things that are happening in and around the elections? Absolutely. We need all of that. But none of that matters. None of it if we don't put our ballot in a box.
Right.
And in Minnesota, 2,500 to 3,500 people per House district who are Republicans did not put their ballots in a box in 2022.
Yeah. Ned Ryan came here and told us that. And had they done that, Keith Ellison wouldn't be our attorney. I mean, there are people who they were gasping. I remember when he said that, I'm like, are you kidding me? What?
Imagine, roll back the clock.
You're not participating.
Imagine what we could have done with a Jim Schultz, the Republican candidate, as Attorney General.
Yeah.
To fight back against a lot of the nonsense that we've seen in the Biden administration, but also to be a check on the Walz administration.
Yes.
The Feeding Our Future scandal.
Yeah.
The hundreds of millions of dollars worth of fraud that's walked out the door. This horrific systemic issue that's presented itself that there's zero accountability for.
Zero.
And a big part of the reason why there's no accountability is because there's no check, there's no balance.
Right.
And you don't have somebody like a Jim Schultz and that attorney general seat.
Yeah.
And so this is not just about, politics and political rhetoric. This has a real tangible impact upon people's actual lives. This is a moral cause.
Right.
And so if you can't take the time to fill out a ballot and put it in a box, by God.
I know. Yeah. I came away, we're going to wrap up here, but I think, again, everyone knows that I ran against Ilhan Omar in that congressional run in CD5, Minnesota, and I was so very disappointed at the end coming to find out there were so many people in the district who actually did not even vote. You didn't even participate. It's like so detrimental. But I will say this. I'm excited. I feel like you, where I'm feeling very enthused to see the unity that we have within the Republican Conservative Party. And the RNC has me on this hype, but Americans have me excited as well because it feels like that throwback to 84, the 80s. It feels good. But what we had today, Savage Americans, is that we have a savage leader here. This is what I'm talking about. This is the kind of representation that I'm talking about. This, in spite of the progressive policies and leadership that we have, with Tim Walz and others that I named here in Minnesota, we still have savage leaders like Walter Hudson. So we're so very grateful to him. Thank you for being our very first.
Absolutely.
Right. This is a great precedent. We're starting out. So love that savage moment. It went viral, by the way. So we're happy to share that with you. Really excited to see the comments coming in. I'm going to have Walter back because I think there's just so much more to talk about. Hopefully we can do this again. I would love to have you. But you know what? Thank you for joining us. This has been The Savage Truth. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And as always, remember, be bold, be strong, be faithful, be true. Till next time, I'm Cicely, and this is Walter Hudson.
The Savage Truth with Cicely Davis is a production of Front Page Magazine and the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Reproduction of this podcast without express written consent is prohibited.